Okay, so this is chapter two of Writing Fiction by Janet Burroway. The second chapter is called Seeing and Believing, Showing and Telling. So, all right. So, if you were here for the last segment, which may or may not be in this video, we covered writing as a craft, the process of writing. And this one is more about a very specific aspect, but very important aspect of writing, which is showing and not telling. Um, so basically, the idea of showing and not telling is, a great way to open up the door for descriptive language, um, such as if you were showing me, then you might say, like, let's say I'm mad. You could say that my fists clenched and like a vein in my forehead bursted out. That's a terrible sentence, but you know what I mean. And then if you were telling me, you just say she was mad, which really like is so much worse because it doesn't give the readers the opportunity to make an image in their head of what's going on. It's just telling them like they're reading an article. And it's a very unfortunate miss in many, many pieces of fiction. So, the first idea that is discussed in this chapter is the idea that a shallow idea equals a shallow story. Now, this might seem like a very harsh point to make about writing as a whole, but it's pretty true. If you have an idea and you're somewhat passionate about it, and for this, I'm talking about like if you're writing a full short story or if you're writing a novel, it's okay to write about pretty much anything if you're just doing a free write or um, you know, something very minor that you're not intending to be a big thing. But in terms of when you're writing grandly, um, and you're writing about something that, you know, you kind of have an idea. It's like, you know, if you have a shallow idea, you don't really know what's going to happen to the characters. You don't really care. You have like a very basic storyline, and that's that's it. Um, you need to, think about that more before you start writing, because one of the dangers of writing with a shallow idea that is not built upon before you begin writing is that you get a shallow story. The readers read it and they feel nothing. And that's one of the worst feelings ever, as an author to, let's say you bring a piece that's shallow to a workshop. Everybody's going to notice. They're going to read this, and when you guys talk about what your intention was with this piece, nobody's going to really have an answer for you. They're going to say something really shallow, like, "Oh, I think your purpose here was to entertain us," which is terrible. You want your piece to be powerful, no matter what the genre is. It doesn't need to be like an extremely sad and emotional piece for it to mean something. It can be funny, it can be adventurous, but even then, when your readers are done reading it, they should have an idea in mind, a question in mind, something to mill upon for a little bit. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that you can make while you're beginning to write a piece is making it intentionally shallow, not taking the proper steps that you need before writing. Um, so that is the first detail. And then the second one, which appeals more to the actual subject, which is showing and not telling is appealing to the five senses. This is the most important part of showing and not telling, you know. Also, I don't know why I'm like changing my handwriting every 5 minutes. Just ignore that. But yeah, appealing to the five senses is extremely important in terms of showing and not telling, because let's say hypothetically you want to describe a a farm, or something. The setting of your story is a farm. You can just say it's a farm, or you can say you can describe the farm using sensory details, such as how it smells, how it looks, um, you know, the sounds that you hear at the farm. You can talk about how there's like an ambient like hum of chickens and a smell of manure, and there's like bales of hay, and it smells like manure and stuff, which I just came up with that like right off the bat. But if you really sit down and you think about what your setting is like, don't say, even if it's a setting that's kind of hard to describe, yes, you can say what it is, but don't start with that. Don't say like John was at a farm. First, start with what John sees, what John hears, you know, very basic things. And then maybe halfway through the paragraph, you can mention what the farm is called in a very subtle way. But, if you start your paragraph and you just say, John was at a farm, then the readers are going to picture like your stereotypical farm, that's very flat, like big red barn and a horse, and that's it. Like you want to really paint the picture. You want the readers to see what you're seeing, to see what you're imagining, because one of the hardest things to do as an author is to get the readers to see and hear and experience what's going on in your head that you're trying to express on paper. And, you know, a big fault of many writers is, you know, just stating. You want to show them. And it might be hard, but it's very worth it in the end when you turn in that paper and it's 10 times better than it once was. Um, all right. The next thing is over explaining is bad. Over explaining is a very big mistake that people can make in writing. Um, so imagine that you're trying to explain a like an emotion that a character is feeling. You've already taken your steps of using the five senses. You've already like done pretty much everything you can, throw in a simile or something. Um, and you are wondering, is my reader picking up what's going on? Does my reader get the message that my character is upset? And then you just throw in a paragraph that says, John was very upset. He was upset because, and then you explain it, but you've already done it in a much more literary way in the previous paragraph. That rips your reader out of the story, because up until you did that, the reader is experiencing the emotions with John and really like empathizing with John in some cases. And by you adding that paragraph that's just blatantly stating what John is feeling, and what's going on, number one, that just, makes the reader suddenly get removed from the story. They're no longer feeling what John's feeling. They're like reading a National Geographic magazine. And number two, it sometimes makes the reader feel stupid. Because if you already added something before that's that's explaining and showing us what John is feeling, then they already know. So you don't need to tell them. And if you're concerned that they are not going to be able to understand what your character is feeling after you've already showed them, then that means that you're not confident in your writing. So you need to go back to that prior paragraph and touch that up instead of adding another one that explains what happened in that paragraph, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. Okay, the next one is a little bit of a more complicated point, but it is worth worth like exploring is concrete details. So concrete details are details that both appeal to the five senses and convey an idea or a judgment. So you want to be very intentional when you're writing. Um, Not every single sentence needs to have a higher meaning in your piece. However, sometimes it's great when that happens. And a concrete detail is a subtle detail. It could be something that offers foreshadowing, for example, but basically it's kind of hard to explain. It's a detail that you include that does appeal to the five senses. So uh, let's say let's say you're writing like a murder mystery and they have not found the body yet. And it's like there's like a two detectives and one of them is John. He's back. One of them is John and then one of them is like Stacy and they're walking around this house with like flashlights and it's like this is their first time exploring the house and then you know you and John, his ringtone for his phone is, um, you know, "Hot in Here" by Nelly, and he thinks he has his phone on him, and the reader already knows that that's his ringtone because it was mentioned way back in the story, and they're searching this brand new murder scene, and it's the first time that anybody's been in the house since the murder happened. And then as they're as they're looking around with their flashlight, you add a sensory detail, which would be hearing, and it's a song echoed from the bedroom above. It's getting hot in here, so take off all your clothes. And in this moment, this is a concrete detail because it's five senses, it appeals to hearing, and it conveys an idea or a judgment that John's phone was at the murder scene. So he so that gives the character the reader the idea that he did it. So that's what I'm trying to say. That's a concrete detail. And those are very, very meaningful because it can reveal something about the story that you don't have to say straight up. Because imagine how boring it would be if you're reading that story and it was just John's phone rang. It was upstairs. It was John. I wouldn't want to read that. And I'm assuming that you wouldn't want to read that either. So try to think about that. Try to think about incorporating concrete details into your story rather than telling. Uh, Next thing is very minor, but this can be helpful. Is to make the reader relate. So what I mean by this, I don't mean like in an emotional way in this moment. That is also very important. But what I'm talking about right now is relatable sensory experiences. So this is pretty easy to do, but some people still don't do it. Is while you're showing us what's going on, uh, you know, let's say that you're using a simile. Use a simile that everyone will understand. Don't make it weird. Don't make it too weird. If it's really meaningful for your story to say that like it was, I don't know, like it was as cold as an outdoor doorknob in December. That's weird. And that's not appropriate for a lot of writing. But if you say something, I don't know, I can't come up with something, but that's not very relatable. An outdoor doorknob in December. Even though if the reader really thinks about it, then they'll be like, oh yeah, metal, it gets cold, blah blah blah. But that's not a smooth reading experience to have to stop at a simile and be like, mm, I don't know. So try to come up with something that the readers can relate to, like something else. Um, for example, you know, try to pick up on familiar feelings, like uh, you know, making comfort be a thing that connects to like holidays or something like that. That's something that is like a universal experience that readers can be like, oh yeah, I totally understand like the nature of this thing or how this thing feels because that's happened to me. So it can be very minor, but make the reader uh, very easily able to understand your comparisons and your sensory details. Not to say that you should make them super basic, but just think about your audience while you're throwing in these details. And then next up is not to label emotion, because emotions are seldom pure. This is very important. When you're doing your day to day life, not even as a writer, but just, living life. Um, you know, let's say you stub your toe, and your first thought is not, ow, I'm frustrated. It's like something else. It's like, ah, shit, that hurt. Like, the first thing that you want to do, let's keep going with this stubbing a toe thing. Um, let's say you're writing a story, and this guy named John, he stubs his toe, and then you go on to say John crashed his toe into the like the hickory leg of his nightstand, um, and then after that you just say John was mad. Come on, why? Just just why? Emotions are seldom pure. And that's the most important thing to remember about this point. Because in your day to day life, even if it's a extreme emotion, let's throw aside the stubbing toe thing. It's like, um, you know, something that has mixed emotions, such as, you have a family member who's been sick for a long time and they pass away. Obviously, you're going to be sad, but there's also a part of you most of the time that's relieved for that person, that they're not going through what they've gone through anymore. Um, and so if something like that were to happen in your novel or your story, and that happened to someone, you would not say, you know, I was sad or I was disappointed. You want to show every angle of how the character is feeling through things that don't involve using the word for what the character is feeling, if you know what I mean. And even if it's a situation where the emotion is pretty pure, let's say in that murder mystery story with John, it's like after his phone rings and Hot in Here starts playing upstairs and Stacy knows that that's his ringtone and he's like, "Oh my gosh." And he's scared, obviously because he's been caught. Um but even then, if you're writing that scene, don't just say John was scared because that doesn't make the reader feel anything. That makes the reader once again feel like they're reading an article or watching a documentary, you know? So explain every angle of an emotion without using the title of the emotion. That's what that means. Seldom pure, you know. Um, okay, next is don't observe the observer, be the observer. This is very important as well. All right, so this is basically saying um, that you need, I forget what the term is, but let's say you are writing about, this is from John's point of view, and you're writing about the the investigation. So John and Stacy are in the house, and John, uh, the author decides to say, John noticed that there was a sound coming from the upstairs. Uh, you're taking the reader out of it, you know. Um, if you just say, John slowly traversed across the dark floor of the quiet house, and then you say a noise erupted from the upper floor. You don't need to say John noticed that. Just say a noise erupted from the upper floor, because if it's in the same paragraph and it's about John and what he's doing, then the reader is going to know already that after you say that the noise erupted from the upper floor, the reader will know that John heard that. And it'll be a better experience for the reader because you're not like ripping them out of it and then putting them in aerial view to make to watch John notice something. They're gonna be John. So that's very helpful. So don't so cut out most of the he noticed, she noticed, he saw, she saw, unless it's very necessary. But there's many cases where you can just say what they noticed or just say what they saw, and it will be understood by the reader. And then finally, the final point is tone shifts. So basically, with tone shifts, this is a very small point, but just be intentional with your tone shifts and pay attention to your tone in general. Because there's many times where us as writers, we have, I'll just say a comparison, a simile. We have something in mind that we've been thinking about for a while before we even had the idea for the story, saying this could be really well compared to this. And it's like low key a gruesome comparison, you know, uh, relating something to something dark or scary or depressing, and you're so eager to use that simile that you use it in like a fantasy romance story that's not even dark at all, but you're so eager to use that simile that you came up with that you just throw it in there and hope that nobody will notice. Um, but that actually affects the tone. So when you want the reader to feel like there is a danger involved, or if there's something bad's going to happen, then you can use the eerie stuff and use these like gruesome comparisons. But if it's a light part of your story, then it's best not to derail it with a crazy tone shift. And most of the time, you know that you're doing it when you're doing it. You just don't want anybody to notice, but it's very noticeable. All right. That is the end of chapter 2, showing and telling. And I will film chapter 3 sometime. It's like very late right now, so not now. But thank you for watching, and I hope that this helped. Stay tuned for chapter 3.